Good evening, and welcome to this edition of the God's Word News Service, the Bishop's Report. Tonight's report is titled, There is Something Seriously Wrong in America Today. I'm your host, Bishop Grigori. We kicked God out of our country, out of our daily lives, out of our personal lives a long time ago. And everywhere one looks in the United States today, the stench of moral rot is unmistakable. This moral decay is found in our family structures, our relationships, in our education system, from kindergarten through high school, and in our colleges and universities. It is also in our art and entertainment, in our politics, and in our everyday lives. Take a good look around you, and you will see that there is just about a complete lack, total lack, of morality and ethical behavior. It's no secret in America today that roughly 48% of the children in the U.S. are born to unwed mothers, and very often that two or more of their siblings were fathered by men of different races. And to make matters worse, over 40% of America's children are growing up without a father in the home. Our traditional family structure has been and is being destroyed thanks to the actions of the immoral and moronic leftists. Thanks to them, for the first time in the history of man on earth, one's gender is now considered to be a meaningless construct that has been imposed on children by uneducated parents and society based solely on the biological appearance of their genitals. Not long ago, a woman had her membership to Planet Fitness revoked because she had the audacity to complain and object to a man using the women's locker room. The woman was labeled as being an intolerant bigot because the man said that he felt like that he was a woman. So according to the left today, the man's imagined feelings trump the woman's right to privacy. Also, at the very heart of the argument for the redefinition of marriage is the claim that gender just does not matter anymore. So therefore, whether children are raised by mother and father, or two mothers or two fathers, just does not matter, because according to the progressive idiots, a father really does not have anything unique to offer a child that a mother cannot provide, and vice versa. The education system in the U.S. today is a complete unfunny joke. Since the average public school in America today teaches very, very little about American history, English, grammar, literature, music, and art. Many children today aren't even taught how to read or write cursive. Instead, all of these lessons and subjects have been replaced with indoctrination on sex, social justice, and environmentalism. Our colleges and universities have become little more than dissemination joints of progressive liberal propaganda. If and when any American history is taught in the United States, this country is portrayed as an immoral nation not fit to exist, characterized by slavery, racism, colonialism, imperialism, economic exploitation, and militarism, rather than as a nation that was founded as a beacon of freedom, and as a nation that has spent more treasure and shed more blood to liberate those oppressed in other lands. Making matters worse, some 2 or 3 generations of American children have been brought up and indoctrinated into believing that morality is really nothing more than personal or social preferences. The truth is that there can be no moral absolutes, no right or wrong, if there is no longer any religious basis for morality. This leads a nation to descend into a society of anything goes, and whatever feels good or right to you, do it. Today, we are being taught to rely on our feelings to determine how to behave, rather than being guided by a code given to us by a power higher than ourselves. Today, instead of giving children moral guidance, we ask them, quote, "How do you feel about it?" End of quote. All of this has led us to the situation we find ourselves in today, where the citizens of the United States, including our politicians and elected officials, either have a complete ignorance and or disdain for the Constitution of the United States. When one listens to the nonsense coming from the left, and many even on the right, you can hardly miss the fact that they are suggesting that our founders and the framers of the Constitution just did not understand modern technology, so therefore arguments about why they set out to defend gun rights set forth in the Bill of Rights just does not apply to us today. This is wrong because what the left refuses to understand is that the framers did not design the Constitution merely to be applicable to their own day, but rather the rights that they enshrined were meant to be timeless and universal. In Federalist Paper number 46, Alexander Hamilton explained why the right to bear guns was so fundamental to preserving American liberty. In Europe, government at that time, and even till today, governments usually did not trust people with arms. This was due to European history being replete with examples of leaders and governments trampling on the rights of the people with impunity, which is what our founders desperately wanted to avoid. An armed population, which is the militia, that is referred to in the Second Amendment, is a free populace and is actually an additional check on the power of the government. A last resort for those who may be oppressed. Another thing we must bear in mind is that Alexander Hamilton made this argument in an era when the kind of weaponry available to the citizens was even closer in parity to that which was available to militaries and governments. The advancement of weapon technology would likely not have surprised the founders, who, after all, lived in an era of remarkable innovations. What would shock them is that our government, the government they gave birth to, would have become so powerful and capable of depriving people of their liberty in the blink of an eye. It is exactly this that those of us who support gun rights fear, and what we believe is the true intention behind the left's gun control movement. The full facts concerning the Las Vegas massacre are still not known, but what we do know is that the shooter was not deterred by current gun laws heavily restricting automatic weapons, which is what the shooter used. And most certainly, neither would proposed so-called common sense laws like cracking down on suppressors have made a difference. Leftist gun control activists pounce on every mass shooting incident to push their agenda. Yet curiously, each time they fail, the mass shooting incidents grow ever more horrendous. And we should not ignore the fact that when many of us heard Barack Obama praise Australia's gun control laws, this led us to the logical conclusion that the real end goal of Obama and his gun control crowd, it was nothing more than the eventual total gun confiscation. And it must be realized that in order to sweep in and confiscate weapons in mass, the government would be taking on precisely the kind of power the founders feared and wanted to protect themselves and future generations against. Large numbers of Americans, including myself, believe increasingly stringent gun laws will not make us safer or freer. Thus, when entertainers like Jimmy Kimmel and other leftist pushers of gun control make passionate pleas for this country to do something, like pass gun control laws to stop violence, few, besides the already brainwashed, are buying it. My prayers and heartfelt sympathies go out to the victims and families of not only the Las Vegas massacre, but all of the mass shootings that have taken place in the U.S. But it must be fully understood that guns, the Second Amendment, the NRA, President Donald J. Trump, are not the problem. The real problem is that there is a very serious problem in the United States that has nothing to do with our Constitution, but everything to do with certain elements serving in all three branches of our government. There is something seriously wrong in America, an evil that is growing worse by the day. And lately, it is even affecting America's children through indoctrination taking place in our schools and through social and entertainment media. So, once again, we are hearing Democratic and some Republican members of the House and Senate, along with other liberals, demanding stricter gun laws. Even so-called constitutional experts are calling for stricter gun laws. And some are even calling for the complete repeal of the Second Amendment. But there's one glaring aspect that they are all ignoring. And that is that the Second Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, which reads, quote, "A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." End of quote. Now, like it or not, every single federal gun control law is an infringement, and therefore they are illegal and unconstitutional. Another very important thing that those on the left are ignoring, either willfully or out of pure ignorance, is the writing of the framers of the Constitution found in the Federalist Papers as to why they included the Second Amendment in the Constitution. And gun control is not an enumerated power delegated to the federal government by we the people. According to my favorite constitutional expert, Publius Hulda, also known as Joanna Martin, J.D., who happens to be a lawyer, philosopher, logician, and strict constructionist of the U.S. Constitution, she states, quote, "Our federal Constitution doesn't delegate to the federal government any power over the country at large to restrict our arms. Accordingly, all pretended federal laws, regulations, orders, opinions, or treaties which purport to do so are unconstitutional as outside the scope of powers designated. They are also unconstitutional as in violation of the Second Amendment. The only power the federal government has over the country at large, respecting arms, is set forth at Article 1, Section 8, Clause 16, with respect to providing for the organizing, arming, and disciplining of the militia. Pursuant to this clause, Congress passed the Militia Act of 1792, which required every able-bodied male citizen, with few exceptions, between the ages of 18 and 45 to acquire a rifle, bayonet, ammo pouch, and report to his local militia unit for training. End of quote. Now, please understand that the state militia is not the same as the state National Guard. James Madison stated in Federalist Paper number 46 that the purpose of the militia is to defend us from federal government that should that government become tyrannical. Now, stop and think about this for a moment. The Constitution does not limit the type or number of firearms that we may possess, nor does it limit the type of ammo or the amount of ammo that we are allowed to possess. Considering the fact that, as James Madison said, that the purpose of the militia is to defend us from the federal government, should that government become tyrannical, then how are we supposed to defend ourselves against such a government if that government has the power to limit the number and type of arms and ammo that we can legally keep in our possession? Also, since the National Guard can be called up by the federal government, this means that they are under the command of not only the state governors, but also under the command of the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. Therefore, if we the people rose up to defend against the government should it become tyrannical, how can we trust that the National Guard will defend us? If they are ordered by the president to put us down, especially if we only have a pistol, shotgun, or hunting rifle, while the National Guard is armed with all of the high-powered rifles and fully automatic weapons. Now, pursuant to Article 1, Section 8, next to last clause, Congress has general legislative powers over the District of Columbia, which is Washington, D.C., military bases, dockyards, mints, federal courthouses, and post offices, as well as such other places needed for Congress to exercise its enumerated powers. The exercise of such powers by Congress over these small federal enclaves is restricted by the Bill of Rights, including the Second Amendment. Thus, Congress is prohibited from making, for these federal enclaves, any laws which infringe the rights of the people to keep and bear arms. Congress may legally and constitutionally require individuals visiting federal prisons, the psych ward of military hospitals, the mint, federal courthouses, and such like to leave their arms in their vehicles. But Congress may not require citizens to obtain and carry a permit or photo ID as a condition precedent to carrying a firearm. As Publius Hulda tells us, quote, the militia of the several states were constructs or creatures of state statutes, not of the federal government, end of quote.